welcome, welcome. Can I get a thumbs up from my colleagues that we are recording? Awesome, thank you. So welcome to the third part of our Roadmap to Reflective Teaching seminar series. This is designed to be, like our previous sessions, is designed to be a very interactive session. So we're going to explore some different ways we can inform our teaching action plans. And we're so delighted that you've chosen to participate in this session today. Brenda, Brittany, and Quincy here on the call will be mixing it up in the chat, and they'll help me throughout the hour by dropping links or answering questions you have. So feel free to chat with them as well. Throughout the next 60 minutes, we will continue to build a roadmap of reflective teaching, and we'll explore ways we can inform our teaching action plans as we engage in reflection, writing, and discussion. Please note that we'll put helpful tips on the slide in brown boxes, and we'll put examples and references in green. So you can always find them at the bottom of the slides here. In the previous two sessions, we've begun to explore a cycle of reflective teaching. In session 1, Brittany highlighted the opportunity to engage in self-reflection and to consider what we do and why we do it. In the second session, Brittany and I provided glimpses into methods to collect data about our teaching and to explore whether what we're doing is working and to look at the teaching experience from diverse perspectives. Here in the third session, we'll think about taking that next step to inform our action planning. What do we want to continue to do in our teaching? What do we want to add, modify, or replace? And in fact, this whole process can really be summarized as what, the what, and now what? These are prompting questions that are a foundation of a model developed by Gary Rolfe and colleagues for the nursing and healthcare professions. However, this is certainly not the only model for reflection or reflective teaching in the literature. And you might be familiar with other models, including the one made famous by David Kolb, which we have a reference for here at the bottom of the slide. But I think that the Rolfe model has a big strength in that it's able to prompt deep reflection through really simply phrased questions. From that model, today's session is really about the now what. This prompt asks us to think about where we are or where we were, and then where we might go. And today we'll think about that idea of action planning by exploring hypothetical but realistic scenarios, and then asking and also thinking about action planning in the context of our own teaching. So let's dive in by meeting Dr. Bolton. Dr. Bolton, or Dr. B as she prefers to be called, is an ATSU faculty member. She teaches primarily in a didactic setting, and for the last few years, she's been teaching several courses, including pharmacology and drug delivery. In fact, she just concluded teaching this course. So in session 1, we talked about taking inventory of where we got started. Dr. B did some reflection, and she realizes she really believes strongly in collaborative learning theory and constructivism. And because of this, she utilizes a lot of group activities throughout her teaching, including formative assessments like Think, Pair, Share, small and large group discussions that she mixes into her lectures, and activities that ask students to think of analogies for the concept she covers in her class. She also asks students to do a final project where they can explore pharmacological interventions or treatments for any disease or syndrome that they would like to do a project on based on something from their own lives or their clinical encounters. The project allowed students to research the intervention and to present on their findings in any way they wanted. So for example, some of her students chose a traditional written report. Others chose oral presentations, and she even had a student who made an animated video game to communicate their findings. So what? Well, Dr. B collected formative and summative, as well as qualitative and quantitative data from her learners and from herself as she taught her class, and she engaged in a process to analyze and synthesize this data. Now she can look at that information based on how engaged students were and how that impacted their learning. For example, she noticed that many of her students were highly engaged during the Think, Pair, Share activity, and discussions seemed to be deeper and more effective because students had an opportunity to collect their thoughts and brainstorm with a partner before talking about that concept with the whole group. She also found that the muddiest points were really helpful because they allowed her to see where her students were getting confused and to be able to address those points quickly because it was clear that, and also because it was clear that she was reading them, the students really felt empowered and engaged in that process of giving her that feedback. But there were also things in her classroom that didn't support the learning outcomes that she hoped, or where her students were less engaged than she had anticipated. For example, Dr. B found that students struggled to stay engaged during her longer lecture periods, and this really impacted their outcomes negatively. On the other hand, students' performance on that final project exceeded her expectations, and they showed mastery of the material. However, student feedback showed that they struggled with the open-ended nature of the project, and they didn't always find the instructions to be crystal clear. These in particular are components of her course that she'd like to focus on for next time. So that really brings us to the now what, right? How is she going to address these observations that she's made about her class as she prepares to teach the class again? And what is her action plan going to look like? Dr. B knows where she is, that's point A, and she knows that she wants to make some updates to her class for the next time, and that's point B. And there are a lot of routes that she can take between these 2 points. How is she going to get there, and what is going to inform the path that she takes? We'll explore this question as it pertains to teaching action plans in just a moment. But for a second, I want to make an analogy. Let's say you want to drive from your house, point A, to campus, point B, or if you work remotely, from your house to the grocery store. I'm sure you could picture the different roads you can take to get to your destination, but you might have one route that you take most frequently. What aspects or details might inform your driving path? For example, maybe I like to pick the route that will get me there the fastest, or maybe I'm more focused on the number of miles that I put on my car. What else? Feel free to shout it out or put your thoughts in the chat. What are some reasons you pick particular routes to campus or to destinations that you have?
On the way to someplace else or someplace I want to stop.
Absolutely, right? Chain driving, I think is the term for that, right? Linking bits of your journey together. Absolutely. I did that yesterday. I had an errand to run on the way to something else, right? And I picked my path that way. Yeah, weather, awesome, Jen. Time, scenery, traffic jams, absolutely. So these are all really, really great different aspects that inform how we might pick the route that we're going to take. And I have brainstormed some of the ones that you shared out too, right? Traffic, particularly at the time of day that you're driving, right? Are you driving past a school zone that's going to have buses? That might really matter. What about traffic control patterns? I don't know about you guys. I don't always like taking uncontrolled left turns. So sometimes I pick a route that I know I can avoid those. Sometimes you want to take windy roads, but sometimes you don't, right? So that might matter. We might have personal preference or scenery, like Joe said, right? We might prefer to go that route because it's just more scenic. Are there accidents or traffic jams, construction? And exactly as someone already shared, thank you, Jean, errands and to-dos that we might want to loop in. So these are just some pieces of information that come from both our lived experiences and our personal preferences, but other details here might come from crowdsourcing. We might listen to the radio on the way and adjust our plan based on traffic or weather reports. When you move somewhere new in particular, you might ask a friend or a family member which way they'd go, or you might rely on a navigation app like Google Maps or Waze that actually recommend a route to you based on a large amount of data. And in this way, we can check our route and see if we're on a good path forward. As we can see, there's a lot of different inputs, and we want to account for these when we make our route. The same is true for teaching action plans. You aren't alone in making these decisions. And there are so many resources that we can leverage and sources we can draw inspiration from when it comes to planning our route in teaching and checking whether we're headed down an effective path. So now I'd like to take just a few minutes to think about a prompt. Where do you turn when you've looked through your learning and course feedback data and you're thinking about what you might do next time you teach the class? In other words, what are some of the resources you've leveraged for inspiration or to check your intuition? And if you're feeling stuck, feel free to think about this not about yourself, but about Dr. B. Where might you encourage Dr. B to look as she sets out to make her action plan? In just a second, I'll put 2 minutes on the clock. And during that time, I'd like you to think on your own and jot down a few ideas to the first set of prompts on the handout we're going to link to in the chat. Or if you prefer, feel free to just use a scrap sheet of paper. That's fine too. Whichever you prefer, please know these notes are just for you. And once the timer goes off, I'd love if you could each put one of your ideas in the chat so we can learn from the knowledge of the group. And as people are adding their ideas in the chat, you might also see things that stand out to you and feel free to jot those down in your notes. So if the link, awesome, thank you, Brittany. So Brittany has put the link to the document where you can make a copy and jot down your notes. You can also use a scrap sheet of paper and follow the prompts that Brittany has put in the chat or download the document. So here's 2 minutes on the clock. Feel free to turn off your camera while you think, and then we'll come back together. Take about another 30 seconds, and then we'll come back together as a group. All right, so that is 2 minutes. I'd love if everyone could start coming back and turning their cameras back on if you're able to do so. And then feel free to start putting things in the chat or come off mute. What are some pieces of information or resources that inform your teaching action plan? Where have you turned to, or where might you turn to? Oops, sorry, Jane, I think you might be on mute. I'm not sure if you're talking to us. Nope, okay. No worries. Lulu, what do you think? Where's the place that you turn to?
You mean that we were just talking about the first point, right?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about what you might do next in your teaching, and you're starting to think about an action plan, what are some places that you look?
First of all, I look at how students did in previous assignments, activities, even how I perceive the experience. So I may have noticed that something that I was doing was not working. So I may decide to change. And now that I was listening to you in terms of the future, what I will do in the future, what I will consider is that a opportunity to incorporate different, I mean, for some exactly the same assignment, I may ask for different options so the student choose, and this will facilitate different learning styles. So that's what I thought.
Yeah, awesome. So kind of thinking about what does the data show you in that last step, right? Of looking at all the data, but then kind of sorting through that and prioritizing, right? Is kind of what I heard you say of what are the top priorities, how we're going to make some changes. I love what I'm seeing in the chat here, kind of looking at feedback from students, maybe not even just the most recent cohort, but what suggestions have previous students given. Thank you, Kelsey. All great ideas. Awesome. Anyone else want to share before we dive into some places we look? Technology, learning outcomes, awesome. All great ideas here. So as we began to do this brainstorm, I'm sure you may have thought about a lot of different places that you could look. And in the next set of slides, we're really going to explore some different ways to inform our action plans across 3 categories. Research, we can leverage previous scholarship in our own fields and across higher education to help us think about what we might implement next. We can turn to our colleagues and learn about what's worked well for them in their teaching practice, or talk to our students, right? As Kelsey shared, we can really engage in a discussion to see what suggestions people have. And lastly, we can always check in with ourselves or our learning outcomes, right? Go back to those learning outcomes and just identify ideas that align with our personal teaching philosophies and that also fit our teaching context. So let's go back to Dr. B. She's interested in turning to the literature as she begins to map out her action plan for her course. As we discussed, she might turn to the research as a way to get some new ideas and to tackle some of the learning problems that she identified in her course as it's currently structured. For example, this might be a perfect opportunity for her to find some activities to replace her long lectures with, as she saw that that was a place she lost student engagement and that impacted her students' performance. By looking into the research, she might find ways other educators have implemented alternative techniques. And by learning about their results, it might give her some ideas about what to expect if she uses their methods. She is also interested in learning more about collaborative learning and constructivism and techniques she may not know already that align with these theories and might be valuable resources to bring into her classroom. So let's see what that might look like. One of the first places Dr. B might look is MedEd Portal. This is a fantastic resource because it's a peer-reviewed journal that focuses on education research specifically in the health sciences. But even more than that, each article is accompanied by the resources needed to implement the intervention described. And this is really helpful because it can save some time as she revamps the course activities for the next time that she teaches it. So let's check out this video for a sample search in MedEd Portal. The text might be a little small, but I hope you get the gist here. So here, Dr. B is searching interactive pharmacology and pharmacokinetics in the search bar. And just looking at some of these article titles, it might even just give her some ideas, right? Just even looking at those titles. Things like case-based learning modules, standardized patient cases, different clerkships, or team-based learning. So she's already gotten a great idea of some places she might start. But let's go into the first article from the search results here. Here, I hope you can see on the right-hand side that attached to the article are a variety of resources, including an instructor guide, faculty and student versions of the lecture materials, and even a formative assessment to test her students' knowledge. So if she wanted to, she could further explore this content and use it as is, or even adapt it for her class. So this is a really great start. But recall that Dr. B reflected and realized that she really values collaborative learning and that this particular model is designed as a self-learning module. So that really doesn't perfectly fit her teaching style and her philosophy. So maybe she would edit her search here to narrow it down to approaches that more thoroughly incorporate interactive group work. And that's what she's doing here now. So for example, here she could read about a pharmacology standardized patient case. The article here discusses how there were significant learning gains amongst the students by using this intervention, and attached are everything from the instructions to the standardized patient script to even the debrief presentation. In reading the materials, Dr. B is really excited to significantly reduce the amount of lecture time next time she teaches the class by mixing in activities like this one, because she feels like it will not only break up the lectures and make the content more learner-centered, but she also really hopes to see the learning gains that the authors reported here in the article. Just like information in your discipline may be constantly evolving and updating, this is true for the pedagogical side of your field as well. But it can be a full-time job in and of itself to sort through thousands of research articles, right? And it can be really intimidating too. So Dr. B is also really interested in letting some of the literature come to her and to help her stay on top of new articles that are coming out on topics she's interested in. One really great tool she can use is alerts through Google Scholar. Has anyone used it before? Anyone? Maybe? Seeing a couple head nods. Okay. So Quincy's got his hand raised. Awesome. So feel free to share in the chat if you have used it or experiences you have with it. But for those who haven't, it's a really nifty tool that lets you get email updates about from Google Scholar with links to newly published articles based on your keywords of interest. And I know we've got some librarians on the call who I'm sure could help you devise those if you're interested. For example, Dr. B might set up an alert for collaborative learning or pharmacology education or medical education. And here's a snippet of an email based on the alert term medical education. Here you can see in this, she's getting links to articles, and you can begin to see some of the keywords that article might contain. Actually, Dr. B not only makes a plan, an action plan to set up these keyword searches and alerts, but she's also decided that she'll reserve an hour every Friday morning to reviewing the abstracts that come through her email, and then she can peruse different articles further if she likes. Receiving these articles might give Dr. B some new ideas, but they also might corroborate methods she's already using, like showing ways other educators have used Think, Pair, Share to improve student engagement. This might give her additional confidence about continuing to leverage these tools in her teaching. So let's briefly come back to our what and our so what steps that we touched on earlier. Based on the literature, Dr. B has some new ideas about how she might mix up her lectures with student-centered activities like the group-based simulated patient activity she found on MedEd Portal. But she's also decided to keep the Think, Pair, Share activity based on her experience from using it in a previous block and based on reports from other educators in the literature, which have validated this tool. So now I'd like to pause briefly and go back to the handout or wherever you are taking notes. Like before, in just a second, I'll start a 2-minute timer. And I'd like you to please think about the second set of prompts related to how you might inform your own action planning based on research. Please just jot down a few ideas about what you currently do or reflections on ways research has impacted your teaching practices. Alternatively, you might think about what you might do in the future based off of either our brainstorm earlier or our discussion just now. When the timer goes off, I'll again invite people to put their ideas in the chat or to come off mute and discuss. And we always want to turn to the knowledge of the group. So here's that 2-minute timer now. Just a couple more seconds and then we'll come back together as a group. All right, that's time. So I'd love to hear some thoughts. How do you currently use research to inform your teaching? Or what might you do in the future? Feel free to put your ideas in the chat or to come off mute.
And Julie, a lot of the courses that I end up leading usually are hybrid, some variation of online components. And so I often rely on the research to talk about best practice about the learning experience, how to design courses so the students can seamlessly interact with instructional content, more focused on what I want them to learn as opposed to worrying about tools or technology, those type of things. And there's, I would say, using some of the tools that you shared, for instance, alerts and Google Scholar. I try to keep up on what the latest trends are on usability.
Yeah, I love that. And thinking about not only what are the activities themselves, but what are the students' experiences going through them, right? How do we make that content intuitive and accessible to our learners? Absolutely. Anyone else want to share?
Yes, I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think in this aspect, a lot of us is just by intuition. So we may think what is best, what we like, what we don't like, but I don't think we have enough time to really do some research on this. So, for example, I just emailed Brittany yesterday about one thing that I have in mind that I didn't know if it was if there is research supporting this.
Mhm.
And it seemed more like my own way of working, but I wanted to see, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is not research supported. And the reality is that so many things we need someone who told us. So to have a clear example, when the pandemic started and we were asked to teach online, so many of us did it incorrectly until someone came and said, don't do videos more than 5 minutes, or things like that. So what I mean is that because education is not our area, we are not really aware of the research that supports our teaching strategies or assignments or evaluations until someone like you come with one course like this or a chat like this where we learn about it. But other than that, it's just by intuition.
Yeah. Well, and Lulu, I'm really glad that you brought this up. You've read my mind, obviously, of where we're going in the next section of the talk, which is discussions and talking to others. But I love what you've shared about we don't know what we don't know, right? And we don't always know what's the quote unquote best way, right? There might be multiple best ways, but or what does data back up? And so I think you're really onto something. It can be a really time consuming task, and there may not be one consensus in the literature. There might be multiple ways, right? We certainly know there's multiple ways to engage your learners. There's multiple ways to teach content in a way that's impactful and effective. So I think that some of these strategies might be ways to help some of that come to us rather than going out and seeking it, because it can be so time consuming to do that. But it also can, I love what you're saying about leaning in with curiosity of, are there different ways to do this? Is what I've, am what I'm doing, or is what I'm suggesting to my students, is that based on my experience, or is there data to back this up? So I love what you're bringing here to the table, and happy to chat about this more. But you've perfectly set me up for the next piece, which is talking to others. So, like Lulu reminded us, that our brainstorm and our discussion has showed we can leverage literature, but sometimes the best way is to talk to other people. I'd like to maybe posit that in some ways, reading literature is a little bit like an asynchronous conversation with our colleagues, in a little bit of a way, right? The authors of the paper had an idea, they tested it, they wrote it up, and now we get to engage with it. And these dialogues and discussions with our colleagues and other educators, these might be more direct ways of helping us by learning what's worked for our colleagues, what have they learned, and it can also help to foster community and collaboration, both within pre-existing teams, but also cross disciplines. So to this end, we're going to come back to Dr. B. She is interested in speaking with her colleagues. Particularly, she wants to discuss this final project that she used in her class. Her hope was that this assignment would leverage her students' motivation and allow them to connect their new content knowledge of pharmacology with their prior life experiences. But if you've ever had an assignment that was so ambiguous or open-ended, you might recall it can be really stressful, right, to even know where to start. And that's what Dr. B really realized was happening in her class. She's interested in learning more about how other educators have found a balance between providing adult learners with autonomy and offering opportunities for multiple means of action and assessment, while still setting expectations with their students and not making it so ambiguous that they find the assignment paralyzing. So previously, Dr. B has found that by talking to other educators, she feels less alone in solving the learning challenges in her course because she can hear in the ways in which others are facing similar obstacles. And she's established really fruitful collaborations, including co-designing a course with a colleague of hers with whom she was able to share experiences from her previous teaching and clinical experiences. So as much as we all love them, those water cooler moments can be increasingly hard to have, right? Whether that's due to our remote working situations or crazy busy schedules. So actually, Dr. B has decided to do something a little out of her box or her comfort zone. She's decided to reach out to a global community of educators by emailing her question to the Dr. Ed listserv. If you are not familiar with Dr. Ed, it's an online discussion board operated by the Office of Medical Education, Research and Development at Michigan State University. It was specifically designed to support discussion and problem solving related to medical education. On the screen now, you can see an example discussion around educational practices. So educators can write in with their questions, and other educators can respond and share their experiences, thoughts, or suggestions. And for those of you who might be subscribed to the listserv, you get a lot a day, right? This is a really fruitful conversation around some really common topics of discussion. So one of the suggestions that Dr. B got from the listserv was to help reduce the cognitive load of her assignment by providing students with a list of example diseases or deliverable types that students can fall back on if they're feeling stumped. And another suggestion was to provide examples of successful projects from former years, and also to still allow students to pursue options to choose their own adventure in terms of project format if they'd like to do so. She liked the idea and she wants to think about how she would rephrase her instructions. As a side note, interestingly, she saw that a few days after she asked her question to the Dr. Ed listserv, she saw another one come through which asked a similar question around engaging adult learners. This showed her that she wasn't alone in her concern, nor was she alone in seeking a solution to it. After this experience, she was inspired by her conversation in the listserv and is interested in setting up a group email with all the other ATSU faculty members who teach pharmacology across the different schools and colleges so that they can leverage their network and share best practices or ideas to support one another. This can help them check that they're on the right path as they each work on their own action plans. And this is a great example of how it can be incredibly beneficial to build intentional infrastructures to support these discussions. Journal clubs, peer observations, and town halls might just be a few ideas. And they can be great places to hear diverse perspectives and to learn what challenges others are encountering and also what they've done that has worked well for them. Like Dr. B's conversation on the listserv, attending conferences can also be a great way to foster dialogues with and amongst colleagues. I'm sure you're familiar with the professional organizations in your own disciplines, but I wanted to share a few that the TLC are a part of that have an educational focus and which discuss topics relevant to all educators. This is a great opportunity to network with other professionals, learn from their research experiences, and to get feedback on your own ideas. In short, conferences are a great way to inform our action plans and check our route. For those of you who've attended an educationally focused conference or training, feel free to share in the chat what you went to or what some of your major takeaways were. Dr. B decided to attend several talks from the free all virtual remote conference, which is hosted by ASU, and which focuses on online learning. She was really interested in some of the ideas that she heard and left thinking about ways she might incorporate some of the asynchronous learning ideas into her in-person teaching, or how she might build in some asynchronous components to her class. For example, she felt herself really drawn to the idea of how to build asynchronous discussion boards for folks who may prefer to write their ideas or who would benefit from thinking more before conversing. So she's interested in thinking about ways she might build in a digital muddiest point so that students can think about what their confusion points are as they start their homework, which might really help them identify where their real questions are. She also went to a session about learner analytics and is interested in learning more about the topic, but doesn't quite have the bandwidth right now. So bringing this together, we saw how Dr. B's discussion with her colleagues at ATSU and really beyond helped inform her action plan by providing ideas and also validating her concerns. From her conversations on the listserv, Dr. B has decided to make some slight adjustments to her final project in a way that still provides students with plenty of opportunity for choice and autonomy, but it also gives them more structure and examples to help her students feel prepared and comfortable with the task. On the other side of the graph, participating in the remote conference gave Dr. B some ideas about how she might modify her Muddiest Point activity. It seemed to already be supporting student engagement and learning outcomes, but she's interested in seeing if some slight adjustments, such as providing an asynchronous option, will further expand the benefits of the tool for her and her students. So we're going to once again come back and reflect. And I want you to think about the next set of prompts on your handout or wherever you're taking notes. I'll start the 2-minute timer in a second. And I'd like you to think about the third set, which is really related to how you engage in or might approach discussions as a way to inform your action planning. Feel free to jot down a few ideas, and then we'll come back together to share. Take another about 30 seconds, and we'll come back together soon. All right, that was 2 minutes. Would anyone like to either put ideas in the chat or come off mute and talk about ways they fostered discussions with other colleagues or ways they might do that in the future?
So Julie, I think it's just funny coincidence, but of course my email pings and I look at it and look what comes through in the Doc Ed listserv. The second annual conference on teaching writing in health professions sponsored by ASU, free of charge. So I just think it's funny how we're talking about discussion, we're talking about sharing resources and ways that you can get ideas out there. And look what's in the inbox.
More ways to do that. That's awesome.
Sent 57 minutes ago. I did not plan that.
It's a plant. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Brittany, for sharing that. Joe, what are you thinking? Oh, sorry, I'm not sure the audio is coming through. Oh, that's okay. Feel free to put it in the chat. We'll read it out for you. Yep, thank you. No worries. So while Joe's typing, let's see. Jen, what are you thinking? What are ways that you support discussions with colleagues or ways you might do that? Thank you. Yeah, while Jen and Joe are typing, I'll share that the TLC recently, well, maybe not so recently, but at the end of last year, we went to the ACT conference. And one of the really great discussions I think we had there was amongst healthcare professionals. There's a special interest group, or a SIG, related to healthcare education. And just some of the discussions that we had, both in the sessions as people were presenting on their work or different projects that they've led, but honestly, outside of the room too, right? Brittany just kind of, and Quincy just kind of talking in the hallways and hearing about what's working for others at their institutions, what are some challenges that they've faced. Yeah, I think conferences can be time consuming, right? It does often require travel, but now a lot of conferences are virtual, and it's a really great way of hearing what's going on. Yeah, so Joe's saying social media was not recommended. Some TED Talks. Yeah, so I think there's I'm interested, Joe, in learning a little bit more about that. I think there's always a grain of salt, right? I think sometimes, just like Amazon reviews or anything else, we want to not just necessarily take things that anyone says, I'm going to go run with it. I think we want to be critically engaging with the discussions and with the suggestions that we're receiving, with, for a lot of reasons, right? The course context might be different. Our department requirements or accreditations might be different. Is it similar disciplines or similar, what works really well with adult learners in online ed might be very different from even higher education, but more at the undergrad level. So we always want to think critically about the suggestions we're being given, but lots of ways we can interact with others really around the globe. Kelsey, I'm seeing your comment here. Your team shares ideas about through conferences and abstracts. Awesome. Yeah, feel free to put in the chat which conferences you've gone to, or what you've some of your favorites. That would be awesome. Jen saying, I believe that the discussion can be formal or informal. Absolutely. I like to inquire with co-instructors after the course to discuss. And in our department, we write formal course reflections. That's a great way of doing it, right? I love that you're sharing. This can be a really formal process, like a course reflection that you type up and you submit, maybe to a curriculum committee or to your team. But I like the idea too that this doesn't have to be, I'm going to carve out weeks and weeks and work on this. It can be an informal discussion or just chatting after class of how did it go. I know we do that at the TLC right after one of our courses. We'll chat about what do we think, what do we want to do next week, what did we learn. So definitely both the informal and the formal. Absolutely, all really great suggestions here. So as we started to touch on in earlier parts of the session and just now in our discussion here, we always want to think about informing our next steps in a way that's authentic to ourselves and that ensures that the next steps fit within our teaching beliefs and values. And this will help make sure that we're moving in directions that feel approachable while still helping us stretch and grow. Like you all, Dr. B is a busy faculty member, although she's hypothetical. She knows that she needs to prioritize which of these ideas that she's going to tackle first. As Lula reminded us, time is really is finite, right? She knows that she doesn't want to lose track of some of these inspiring ideas, even if they're more long-term. So she's now really interested in taking the 2 axes graph that you're seeing on the screen and reorganizing that into 3 sticky notes: now, soon, and later. Ideas on the now list might be things she's planning to work on over the next couple days or weeks. Soon might be the next couple months, and later might be over the next year or 2. Or just ideas that aren't urgent, but she doesn't want to lose track of, like a parking lot, right? In doing this sorting process, it's important for Dr. B to account for a few different factors. For example, how energized is she about each idea? How well does it align with her current circumstances? How much energy does she have? And how much room does she have to implement the idea? Remember that if we're going to implement an action plan, we have to ensure that we have the gas to get us to our final destination and the resources to keep us on track and on time. For example, Dr. B feels really excited about the feedback she got from her peers about ways to improve the final project, and she feels comfortable and excited to implement these suggestions promptly. She's energized by the idea that these minor adjustments might have significant positive impacts on the student experience, and she's delighted that she can continue to use this project in a way that she really likes because it offers flexibility to her students. She also feels excited about utilizing the resource from MedEd portal and thinks it's a great way to address her long lectures while saving her a lot of time and energy because those resources are already made for her. While Dr. B is excited about the idea of breaking up some of her long lectures, like the activity she found, she also had to be really honest with herself. Changing all of her lectures right now really just doesn't feel attainable. And it would require her to shift effort from another really important project that she's working on right now. So instead, she decides to put this a little further back on the burner. And as she has time and energy over the next couple of months, she'll continue to explore the literature, talk to her colleagues, and comb through her lecture content to see where she can introduce some additional changes that align with her goals as a teacher. She also decides to put building out that asynchronous muddiest point on the soon list. It's something she feels like she could build in Qualtrics or another polling software relatively quickly, but the data from her learners suggested that the muddiest points were working pretty successfully as it is, and she wants to focus on other areas of her teaching first. And what about her laters? Remember that she was intrigued when she heard about learner analytics at the conference. She's interested in continuing to learn more about it, but the online learner analytics that she learned about in the presentation really just don't fit with her course context currently. And she's already conducting a number of formative assessment techniques in her teaching. So while she doesn't want to act on this idea right away, it's not something she wants to lose track of, and she doesn't want to ignore it. Also, historically, she's really gravitated toward collaborative work, but she saw as she was going through the MedEd portal that she was able to learn about different techniques related to self-paced learning or differentiated learning for adult learners. And this is something that's commonly addressed in her field. So for that reason, she's interested in continuing to think about ways she might add that into her course, but in a way that feels authentic to her teaching style as well. So for the last time this session, let's turn back to the handout. I'd like you to think about the last set of prompts, which Brittany is putting here in the chat in just a second. How have you previously leveraged self-reflection in your action planning? Or what might you do in the future to check in with yourself about your teaching practices? Let's again take about 2 minutes to quietly think on our own, and then we'll come back together. Hit the 30-second mark. We'll come back together soon. All right, that was 2 minutes. Would anyone like to share in the chat or by coming off mute? I sometimes have to really come back to that now, soon, later model because there's a lot of things that are really exciting, right? But sometimes it's just we've got a lot going on, and it's balancing, right, all the balls that we're juggling. But we also don't want to lose track of those great ideas. Maybe it's something we want to come back to, or something we might recommend to a colleague. So it's something I have to ask for myself now, sooner or later. Yeah, Kelsey, a notebook, absolutely. Yeah, so I think this is a great idea of having those notes in one place. So whether it's digitally, whether it's a hard copy, having some place there you can keep track of those notes. That's a really fantastic idea. And I'm not sure if this is exactly how you're using it or not. Feel free to come off mute and share with us. But I love the idea. It sounds like you're suggesting that after class you would jot down some notes, like a teaching diary. And I think it's such a great idea because in hindsight, it can be so hard to remember what was I thinking, right? Or not what was I thinking, but what happened, or what was going through my mind when this happened. So having those prompt like notes that you can write for yourself after class, and then being able to then turn that into a data point and now soon later. I really love this idea of like a lab notebook, but a teaching notebook.
Yeah, it was it used exactly like that. We tried some new things this year, and I didn't want to forget what I wanted to change for the next year. We only teach this class once a year, so it was very helpful to be able to jot down those notes right away, because otherwise, like you said, I would not have remembered.
Yeah, I absolutely love this idea. And for those who might be interested in taking handwritten notes, but don't want to, I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I have two notebooks and I read in one and I wanted it in the other. There's some really great ways that you could scan those and upload them to a Google Drive folder. Lots of ways that you can keep those notes for yourself. Even if you run out of space in your notebook, you can always come back to them. But I absolutely love this idea. And actually, I think I'm going to use that the next time I teach. Kelsey, I love this idea of a teaching notebook. And if you turn your teaching into action research, what a great way to turn back to those notes as some data. Different topic, but I thought I'd throw it in. Anyone else? All right. Well, feel free to add to the chat if inspiration strikes. So as we conclude making our action plans and checking our routes forward, that really sets us up to then implement those ideas, right? Which of course then brings us back to the beginning of the cycle. We want to continue to reflect on what we're doing in our teaching, to see how it's going, to solicit feedback and ask those questions, what, so what, and then of course, now what, right? Thinking about what comes next. So I want to thank you so much for joining today and for participating in both the group discussions and the personal reflections. We hope that this has given you some interesting ideas, and we're excited to support you as you take your journey through reflective teaching. On the screen, we have put our website and our email address, and the QR code here will link you to our consultation calendar if you'd like to meet with us one-on-one to discuss this or really anything else related to your teaching. And thank you, Brittany. I see you added that to the chat. So we'll hang out if you want to keep chatting, but thank you again so much for being here, and we hope you have a really great rest of your day. Thank you.